additional remarks on this, because the solidarity, not only by COVID-19 and all what is happening, but in general, the problems of those who are becoming richer and those who are becoming poorer in Europe, and so on and so on, is one of the questions, really existing challenges for us. What about the European idea? That's quite necessary, because I'm repeating my statement always. The Europeans are only 5 to 7% of the global population, not so much. We are still 20% of the economic results. It's quite okay, but I think it's becoming lesser and lesser, because China is coming up, India is coming up, and that's good that not only the two, but also others coming up, that the differences are not so big. But what is the role of Europe by all these changes? In ecological questions, as we are discussing, but also in social questions, the migration question, and so on and so on. And in general, I think we need ideas, we need connections, we need devotions to convictions. I think some ethical basis is for sure necessary. This to discuss, and I think we will do it with a limit of 1 hour. We have invited the three. So far, I'm now asking who will take first the floor. I think as an old Viennese, I try to be polite. I'm asking Katrin BÖTTGER to start. Katrin BÖTTGER, the floor is yours. No connection. Ah, hello.
Thank you very much. I cannot start my video, so if you can enable my video, then I will also wave at you and you will not just hear my voice. There we go. Yes, okay. Good evening, and thank you very much for the invitation for this discussion, and also for inviting me to be part of your International Council. And I'm happy that this already results in this practical experience of cooperating in the discussion. As you mentioned, the topic of solidarity is quite a wide-ranging one that has become up to date in the face of the different crises that the EU has faced in the last maybe 10 years. And I would like to focus in my short, I was told to give you like a 5-minute brief introduction, just to give you some arguments from my side so that we can then discuss these further also with the participants. First of all, I would like to argue that if you sum it up, the COVID-19 pandemic has rather reinforced solidarity within the EU, because recovering from the health-related and of course also the economic crisis has become the top priority for the EU for the upcoming years, and has also strengthened the political willingness for cooperation and to find European solutions. Of course, at the beginning of the pandemic, we had to witness unfortunate, I would say, national unilateralism, such as border closures and export restrictions on medical supplies. But I would argue that this was quickly replaced by a more collective and coordinated actions, including solidarity measures among the EU member states, such as medical solidarity, for example, providing medical supplies and personnel and receiving COVID-19 patients for treatment from other member states, something that we can now witness again in these days, but also economic solidarity. So measures for the recovery of the European and the national economies. I would take, of course, a look a little bit more at the German perspective, where we would say, or I would argue that Germany had a key role to play while holding the Council presidency. Expectations for this presidency were very high. I always say that we had to go from expectations management to crisis management, and the presidency had to change its priorities in the course of the preparations, leading to the new presidency slogan, "Together for Europe's Recovery," which also signals a form of solidarity. Another element that is interesting to see from the German perspective is that the pandemic also had the ability to strengthen the Franco-German couple in suggesting the creation of the European Recovery Fund. And this joint initiative that entered into the negotiations about the NextGenerationEU program is a result of this. But I think, first of all, on the one hand, this is a drastic policy change for Germany in contrast to promoting austerity during the global financial crisis that started in 2008. On the other hand, when we look at the prolonged negotiations about both the NextGenerationEU, but also the Multiannual Financial Framework, and the role that veto players can play here, we see that this solidarity, while it may be existing on a more general level, can be hampered by small groups or individual actors who do not support the solidarity, or who do not go along with it, or don't see it as solidarity because, of course, of the rule of law elements that would be decided together with the Multiannual Financial Framework. I think another argument that I always like to make is that in Germany, the discussion about solidarity is very often about others being solidary, showing solidarity with us, or supporting certain projects. But I think the core of the idea of solidarity is really to give first and then to ask it second. Because I think if all actors in the EU would be more willing to give a little, and then I think all members, be it on the member state level or on the citizens level, would profit more from policies that are being decided. I think one final element when discussing this in the framework of the Institute for the Danube Region and Central Europe is that solidarity can also have an excluding effect. While you mentioned the small size of the Europeans with regard to the world, it's also important to keep in mind that if there's certain solidarity measures that are being taken within the European Union, this explicitly excludes other countries and their citizens that are lying outside of the EU. These are maybe just a few arguments that I would like to give for the discussion. I don't want to keep talking any longer, but I look forward to the exchange. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. BÖTTGER, for your comments, and I think quite some essential remarks. I'm asking now Rastislav KÁČER to take the floor.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and good to join you after our board afternoon, very informative exchange. There is nothing much to add, Dr. Busek, to your introduction, frankly, because I think we all feel that something serious is going on today. And it feels like we, and I mean collectively here, we in Europe are not absolutely ready, or not completely ready to take the challenge, which is here. Solidarity, it's one of the issues which was visible, and actually it's one of the pillars of the European Union since its creation. The rule of law, values, democracy, and solidarity goes hand in hand, and that's the fabric, or that's the glue, or that's the cement, which is binding the construction of European Union together. The first test of that, a visible test of that, was during the migration crisis 2 years ago, or 2.5 or 3 years ago, whatever was the time. And we saw that we are not extremely strong on that. We saw us in Central Europe behaving as a little different, as a kind of reservation of a weird approach to solidarity, like solidarity was one-way street. It's good when cohesion funds come, but when then you should do something about being more solidary, then you turn a deaf ear to that, which was not extremely encouraging for the rest of the EU. But truth is that, as you rightly pointed about the growth of China, India, other parts of the world, truth is that globalization, it's coming, whether we like it or we don't. It's not a Mr. Soros plan. It's not Illuminati conspiracy. That's just happening because the world is going through such a fast technological progress that the consequences of technological changes and its impact to the world are just unstoppable. And here the question is whether the EU and the model on which we opted, and was model of success for the last 70 years, it's going to be competitive model for the future, or it's not going to be competitive model for the future. And China is not going to stop. And whether we are today a community which is having a substantial impact on the world economics and the world politics, this may not remain so. We are facing a couple of problems today, and those problems do not care about our small national borders. They don't care about Viktor Orban. They don't care about my prime minister. They don't care about small borders drawn on the paper. We see it as an impact of COVID. We see it as an impact of global warming, but there are other things we just, they don't care about, our small pencil drawn things on paper. And this impact are going to be very, very serious. My view here is that we have pretty good diagnosis. We quite know what's going on here. As you said during our board meeting, we got a lot of smart analysis. We produce a lot of papers in which you read and you know everything which is going in the world. We are very bad in action. We are very bad in what to do about those things, how to bring things into reality. And it's frustrating, I have to tell you, because I've been policy planner for most of my life. So most of my career in the last 20 years was related into formulating, analyzing, and then formulating practical policies, what we should do about that. And for the first time in my life, here I'll be very frank with you, I'm falling short of my plans. Because I may have plans, but I know that those plans are not going to fly. With those plans, it's very hard to win anything. It's very hard to win the vote, and it's very hard to win the leaders. Something happened on the top of that, and I don't know whether this is a result of social changes, the gap between the last big crisis in Europe, generational gap, or social network impact. Probably it's a multitude of things which are coming now together in the wrong place in the wrong time, which is producing the society where leadership is almost impossible and the clever ideas are almost impossible to be pushed in the way that it's a real political plan, which then you can go ahead. To me, that is the only chance for us here in Europe, for this almost 500 million nation, almost 500 million people here. And that plan is to unite more. We need stronger Europe. I'm absolutely confident that to fight global changes, we need more Europe. To fight global warming, we need more Europe. To fight in COVID and other things, we need more Europe. But first of all, to fight the overall world competition in the critical technologies, which will become soon new weapon of choice, and that is artificial intelligence, biotechnologies, technologies of bionics, the Neuralink, the things which are going to change humanity as we know it. If we want to compete there, we need stronger Europe, more united Europe. Though what we saw on solidarity issues, we saw it during migration crisis, and we see it now even with COVID. And here I would agree, what Katrin was saying. We see flashes of solidarity here. We saw lots of solidarity down on the ground, that's clear. Even almost in every country, we saw lots of will of people to take measures, to obey the rules, to take austerity more than I would have expected. But then even at some international level, yes, countries were taking patience from one another, saying sending technical equipment. Now we see the plan which is being blocked by two countries, Hungary and Poland so far. But we see lots of solidarity. But on the other hand, when you would follow local politics, we saw so much of counterintuitive thinking. The first instinct was closing the border. And I never understood this, because if we have situation which is plus minus similar, and with the COVID it's plus minus similar, and I saw it between Czech and Slovak Republic, or between Slovakia and Hungary, or between Slovakia and Austria, what's on the earth is different if you come from Brno to Bratislava than from Nitra to Bratislava. I just don't get it. It's the same thing. Why the instinctive thing is to close the border, and people like it. And when I spoke to my minister and I spoke to my state secretary on these measures, they said, oh, you know, people want it because people, if we close the border, it looks like we do something about it. We say, well, but you do something, what it takes, what it will produce. And they say, probably nothing, but it looks good. People want it. It's a popular demand. And this is the risk. And here I'm going to stop and we will get there back in the debate. We don't get into the politics, which is driven by vision. We get into the politics, which is driven by popular demand. And popular demand is often the result of the most complicated, crazy debates over social networks, often influenced by the heavy info war propaganda, which is driven to unglue and wedge the European Union as much as possible. So here I stop with the last comment, and that comment is, we know what's going on. We know that competition is growing. We know the world is spinning and it's not going to be waiting for us. We are just losing the action. We are losing the grip on that because counterintuitive reaction here, it's prevailing instead of Europe pulling together more. Maybe I'm too pessimistic on that.
Pan KÁČER, děkuji. That was a very straight analysis, I may say, and I think it's necessary to discuss it, but it's also necessary to act. But this is another question. Now I'm asking Márton UGRÓSDY to take the floor. UGRÓSDY Márton úr, tessék.
Vielen Dank, Herr Busek. Just to very quickly reflect on what Ambassador KÁČER said about the closing of the borders, I think this was a very interesting moment because all of a sudden it seemed that the nation state is not that already, because the national, one of the most natural units, how communities have answered as a reflex, if you wish, to this new situation was on the national level. And it was really interesting for me to see that even in countries which has been very pro-federal Europe over time, the measures which were taken by the governments were always focusing on the national level, and somehow society was content with that. So if you look at the approval ratings of governments as going up and down as a result of the measures which were taken in different countries, it was really interesting to see that swift and harsh, if you wish, measures resulted in the popularity of some of these governments if the plans were executed properly. I very much agree with Dr. BÖTTGER about solidarity being a very broad concept. And I think it's also really useful in the sense that everybody can understand it differently a little bit. So to add a few other aspects there, I think solidarity would also mean that we should respect each other's opinion. We should agree to disagree. And also we should acknowledge that despite of the common progress we had over the last years, especially since most of the Central and Eastern European countries have joined the European Union, democracy can still be different as we visit these countries, and historical determinism is still very powerful when it comes to the form of government which is taking place in these countries. The veto was mentioned, and I'm not pessimistic on that, because it seems like that German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas has a signal that there might be an agreement in the making. I think it will be crucial to come to some kind of agreement, because obviously action cannot wait for long. If we look at the economic crisis which will unfold as the result of the COVID pandemic, which is much bigger than ours. So this way, if we can reach an agreement, I think that would be very reassuring. And I'm still very positive, surprisingly, about the resilience of Europe, because I do believe that we can afford to have these kind of political disagreements when it comes to what direction the EU will take in the future. And I think it is absolutely necessary to have these kind of debates, because for a long time the EU was a technical project. It started out as the coal and steel community, I think around 70 years ago, and that was very technical, to be honest, regulating quotas, trade, and so on and so forth. And as the EU has expanded, because it answered the different challenges it were facing over time, it has grown, and it became more and more political. And for me, it's a bit surprising to see that. Why are we surprised to see that we are having political debates over political issues? And we have the necessary platforms to discuss these. We have the European Parliament, we have the European Council. And this way, I think it's healthy to have these kind of political debates, and we should have them now, because if the EU wants to develop further, either in the confederal or the federal way, we should close these questions, and we have to convince each other, and we have to come to a common agreement on what course we're going to take, because otherwise member states will feel that they are either being left out of the decisions, or more negative, in a more negative aspect, that they are forced to take decisions that they wouldn't like to take. So in this regard, I think we should talk about these issues. It's painful, it's hard, it takes a lot of time and effort, and we might do not like each other in the meantime while we're having these debates. But if I look back at the history of the European Union, I see resilience, and I see that the principle of nothing is agreed until everything is agreed has been observed, and we might be better off that way. And a final word, I think, and I might agree with Ambassador KÁČER, that we need more Europe, even though I would rephrase that we need a more functional Europe, which can address those challenges which are lying ahead of us, whether those should come from a pandemic, whether that should come as a form of a financial crisis, whether that should come in a form of challengers of Europe across the world, whether it's about the more smooth functioning of the single market, and so on and so forth. So let's keep things practical, if I can say that, and focus on the results. And maybe we should acknowledge that political debates are necessary, but maybe we shouldn't overemphasize the role of these differences all the time, because if you look at the statistics that how the European Council is voting, it seems like that in the 95% of the cases, we're reaching unanimous decisions. So it's not that bad after all. And of course, we're going to have political differences, but this is how politics is. So we shouldn't be afraid of having these debates. Thank you.
Köszönöm szépen, UGRÓSDY úr. Many thanks for your clear position. I think it's quite necessary that we discuss it in this way open, because sometimes I think we are making sentences and statements in one direction and the other making the other direction, but we have no exchange. And that's for sure necessary, because we have to know each other better. I think I'm quite in favor, and so far it's quite okay that you brought this point of view to discussion. So now the first round is finished. Still, we have a little bit more than half an hour rest. And I'm asking the participants here on the panel maybe to comment each other. Who is starting? Nobody?
I can go ahead because I have the most. Yes, thank you. I have the most to comment on because I spoke first. So I will go first. I would like to thank the other two participants of the panel also for their input and also for already reacting to my comments. I think whether I'm optimistic or pessimistic, I think both positions have merit, because I'm also an eternal optimist, and I'm in general very optimistic about the future of the European integration process. I do think that there are some issues that make this crisis somewhat different. And one, I think, is that the elements that were described that we need to deal with, including digitalization and climate change, are topics where we have a low responsibility on the European level, so it's something that's mostly dealt with on the national level, and we have a low EU acquis density, let's say. And the same is true also, I think, for issues like the rule of law or anti-corruption, which is an issue both potentially within the European Union, but also, of course, in the neighborhood, which I often work on. So I think that this will provide an especially different challenge for the crisis, because if we have an economic crisis, this is an issue that is dealt with on the supranational level anyway. But if we deal with a health crisis where we only have coordination competences on the European level, it is much harder to overcome. On the other hand, I'm also optimistic because if we look at, for example, the vaccination plan that the European Commission has put to the table, and how the member states have also coordinated their vaccination plans on the European level, it can be seen that even if there is no competence on the EU level, there is still possibility for cooperation and also for working together. Thank you.
Thank you. Who will be the next? Mr. KÁČER, please.
I have just two very quick reactions to what Mr. UGRÓSDY was saying. Democracy can be different. Yes, there are variations in democracy, but there are limits in creativity in there. So we have to be very careful. And second thing, which I wanted to say, when I was in my teen, my father was always telling me, it's not only important what you do in your life, but often how you do it's equally important. And often in these processes, in internal debates within the EU, it's extremely important how we do things, what kind of words we use, and what kind of rhetoric we use, and how we behave in there. And this was like, I give you more understandable example, would be how to judge President Trump. Because if you would look at some of his actions, that was not such a disaster. There were some policy lines on which he achieved results, no question. But when you will look how this was done, the damage by how was sometimes probably more important than what was achieved at the end. So my bottom line is here, democracy, there is not unlimited creativity in that shop, and within the EU that is extremely important, that we stick to the values and that we stick to the rule of law. And second is how we do things. It's sometimes extremely important because if we do it wrongly, we poison whole the process, and the results which we achieve, they do not have a too long standing, or they do not have a full value on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. May I say that's one important point. I think we need not only comparison of different point of views coming from the governments and coming from different countries. I think we need a real exchange, because otherwise we are not able to find a solution. We are not able to find a compromise, and so on and so on. I think here we have to learn a kind of European democracy, which is not fully existing. I think it is only in parts. One of the analysis which is always connected with the situation of democracy in Europe is that not only the institutions are not fully developed. I think it's not only a question of institutions, it's a question of the way how it is handled and how the exchange of views is done. Mr. UGRÓSDY, do you want to comment on this?
Just very quickly, first of all, I think what Dr. BÖTTGER has mentioned about the coordination of vaccination policies is a very good example that how the EU evolves functionally, because we saw that there's a need for greater coordination to overcome the effects of the pandemic. And without this being enshrined in the Acquis or the Lisbon Treaty or anywhere else, the member states have started to coordinate their activities. And I'm not ruling out that at a certain point, there might be greater coordination in health policies, because this is how we are going to react in the long run to new pandemics, which will certainly strike as globalization will become more and more prevalent. And in the EU, I think the debate is really interesting. And of course, how we say things and how we behave is important. But sometimes I think, and I'm not speaking for the Hungarian government, so I'm offering my personal point of view here, is that there is some feeling that those member states which has joined after 2004 are still regarded as junior member states. So sometimes these countries have to shout louder to be heard. And a way to be heard is to behave unconventionally. And of course, this is a different way of ensuring one's interest than it was done for a long time, especially as long as there were only 6 member states in the European communities. But like it or not, the discussion, the nature of the discussion and the style of the discussion is changing. You can call this populism, you can call these the Trump effect, you can call these people having their voices heard through social media and so on and so forth. And we have to find ways how to manage this. And I very much agree with you, Dr. Busek, that we have to keep the discussion going. But if we exclude someone from the discussion, we're not going to have a discussion, we're going to have a monologue. And that doesn't necessarily get us to anywhere.
Thank you very much. I think you were speaking about the ways how things are treated within the European Union, and it's quite an important point. And I think I want to move a little bit to one comment of Mrs. BÖTTGER. I think personally, I'm really skeptical that this axis between Paris and Berlin is still the reality of matchmaking of the political business. I think it should be broadened. Mr. UGRÓSDY had the right point. I think sometimes I have the feeling, I may say not for Austria, but for the later coming members of the European Union, that they are sometimes marginalized. I think there is a tendency for a long time to say they have to learn how to be European and so on and so on. I think President Chirac expressed it in a certain case quite clear. First of all, they have to learn how they are, and then they shall speak. I think we are equal partners, but is it really for guaranteed? Here I'm a little bit the voice of smaller countries, but the number of smaller countries in the European Union, they are not so few. May I ask you how you are looking to this?
Was this question directed at me?
What means solidarity between bigger and smaller countries?
Yes. No, I'm happy to.
Economically more powerful or being on a lower level?
So I think I would like to start on answering this question with a personal anecdote, because I still remember when Austria joined the European Union, but I also very strongly remember the time when the Central and Eastern European countries joined, and I even started learning Polish because of the enlargement process. So I'm very invested in this whole process also personally. And I think I would definitely agree with you that the member states that joined at that time were and maybe still are considered as different members. I think there are two reasons for this. One is the fact that the enlargement process took such a long time that they were already present in Brussels and within the institutions as observers for a long time, that this role was really institutionalized in a way as an observer role. And I think while it was always made clear to these countries that they would have to change and adapt to the European Union, it was very little discussed about how the EU would have to change when becoming a union of 28, 27 member states. I think this is something that was maybe under-acknowledged from a certain perspective. When it comes to the role of the smaller member states, it is definitely in the discussion in Berlin, it's definitely acknowledged, sorry, that there are increasing different alliances also forming among member states. And I think this is a process that is sometimes, if I may say so, for the government a little bit annoying, but from a scientific perspective, should not be very surprising, because if you have groups that meet beforehand, like the German and the French foreign ministers, why shouldn't the other foreign ministers meet beforehand and discuss certain issues that they have similar interests in? I do still think, though, that the German-French axis is relevant in the sense that, and I have to struggle now to translate this, but as they always form a so-called Stellvertreter-Kompromiss. So when they find a compromise on a certain issue, it has a much higher chance of being passed through the different institutions than if they cannot already agree. And I think this has been shown to be true again also for the Recovery Fund and for the Multiannual Financial Framework. So I do think that, and not because they are the only ones that count, but because with their differing views and differing positions, they already encompass such a large variety of positions that they have a higher chance of finding a compromise that can then be supported by more member states. And I think this is also how this axis should be understood. I think that the term axis is also a little bit misleading here, because it sounds like, you know, they make the decisions and everyone else should follow. That's not how I see this, the structure, and that's not how I see it functioning, because there's a lot of discrepancy in the positions between these two countries alone also.
I think I'm the moderator now of this discussion, but I think here I have a specific position. I understand what you are saying. It might a kind of preparatory work which was done by Paris and Berlin and so on and so on. But I think here I'm on the side of my friends, the former other side of the Iron Curtain. I think they are feeling everything is prefabricated. It's already done, and no chance, I think, to change something. Because it's coming out of more sensible things. For example, my dear, if you look how the responsibility is divided between the different members of the European Commission, I think always the commissioners coming from these countries, the latecomers of 2004, 2007, they are getting less important responsibilities. I think they are always in a certain way marginalized. I think everything is only looking to more westwards. I think even it started this nonsense with the expression Eastern enlargement. The so-called Eastern enlargement was an enlargement in the center of Europe, not an Eastern enlargement. Here, I think the misunderstandings are starting. And I think it's very nice that the European Parliament is sitting in Brussels or Strasbourg, or I have to say it the other way, Strasbourg and Brussels. But I think the time would be the right one to say, okay, Brussels out of technical reasons. Why not Krakow? I think sometimes places have a kind of symbolism for psychological understanding. And I think in this direction we have to move. And I don't want to blame Mrs. BÖTTGER for the behavior of the stronger partners within the European Union. But I think we have to do something also on the side of science, of the social movements and so on, to move stronger in this direction. Otherwise, we are getting no solidarity, because solidarity means that we are meeting on equal level. And I think this equal level is not really existing. Here I want to be a little bit of the advocate, beg your pardon. Who wants to continue?
Can I just make one brief comment? So first of all, I don't feel like you were giving me all the blame, and I'm not a representative of the government. So even if I try to change it, I don't think I could. I do acknowledge the fact that I am a German and I have a distinctly German perspective, and that's why I also enjoy the discussion and my role at IDM now, because it gives me a chance to see more than just the Berlin bubble. And the other thing is that I did a lot of research when I was at the Center for Research on Federalism in Tübingen a while back on cross-border cooperation also, and specifically looking at the comparison of the cross-border cooperation between Germany and its Western neighbors and Poland and Czech Republic and so on. And at the time, and unfortunately I think this has not substantially changed, you could tell that there was a difference on several levels, and one, I think, important element, and that's why I also mentioned that I started to study Polish at the time and not Russian, which would have been strategically smarter, but not, beyond the point somehow, is that there are very few people that are oriented in Germany towards the East. I think it's already a problem from West Germany to East Germany, but that's our problem. But then going further east, this is even less an acknowledged area. It's not where we go, where many Germans, let's say, go on holiday. It's not where they want to go for student exchanges. So it's something that is not very, very well known. So I think this is definitely a level where we could improve things and open them up more towards not just wanting to study in the UK at the time or in France, but to also go and study further from Germany towards the East in countries like, for example, Poland or the Czech Republic or Hungary also. So I think we're closer maybe in position than it might appear. But I want to leave the floor to everyone else too.
I believe you, that's for sure, because to be, I think, really fair, it's also moving in the other directions. You know, the Austrians and the Slovenians tried to join the Visegrad countries, this Visegrad +2. It's not done. especially our Polish friends are against, because they are saying the real change must be building up the Weimar triangle between Poland, France, and Germany. I think that's the direction, the other direction which you were describing.
Yes.
I beg your pardon, I'm occupying the discussion. I think Mr. KÁČER?
Yeah. There was a time when Poles didn't care about Visegrad too much, and they say, well, Visegrad, we don't know, that's too little to us. We have more important format, which is Weimar free. It's gone. Maybe it will come back. We will see. As a sign of solidarity, I'm having here a Grüne Weltbühne from Krems. But on these, Katrin, you're Polish, you should have opted for Chinese if you were really visionary or talking of perspective. But on the second class and first class, there is certain mythology about that. And Dr. Busek, thank you for taking the devil's advocate for us. But here I have to tell you that I as a person, and I'm in the service in 28 years, I never felt second class, frankly, as a diplomat. I never felt it in real world. Though, sometimes we produce leaders. When I accompanied them for meetings in Brussels, they behaved like second class. So then I was not surprised that they were treated or they were accepted like second class because they behaved like idiots. So often we caused self-inflicted wounds, which then resulted into kind of divisions within there. And truth is that, look at German case. And Katrin was right here. We are different, and I'm surprised that 40 years of communism caused the wounds, which are still hard to heal and makes us different in approach. In some of the realities we feed in Eastern Germany, and Germany invested a lot in unification and amalgamation of that. So we are different. What I blame the first class here, I hate to use that, is sometimes lack of sensitivity and understanding what are the differences, why are the differences, what are the causes of differences here, and be a little more sensitive in the approach and in the debate. But truly, I never felt that we are second class. And even if it comes to solidarity, which is the core of our debate tonight, is that in reality, countries of V4, we can outvote in combination of our votes, Germany and France combined. Well, I think that's a strong thing. If we would look what we put at table in terms of GDP, well, I made a calculation once when I was invited in Budapest 2 years ago to speak in Economic Club. And at the time, there was a statement by Prime Minister that Central Europe is the source of growth in the EU. And if Central Europe, Visegrad would stop growing, EU will turn into red numbers. And then I'm sitting in the car, I pull the Eurostat statistics and I try to combine on a calculator, what was it? What is the reality? And my reality, when I look at the GDP, not per capita, PPP, relative numbers, but what you put, what you bake and you put at the table. What we bake and put at the table 2 years ago was 5% of European GDP, 5%. If 5% of our European GDP would stop growing, it would probably be lowering down overall GDP growth in the EU by 0.1%. It wouldn't be too much. So we should not complain here and, and use artificially all of that mythology of second class too much, because by the weight of vote, what we got, and of course, I'm not saying of veto, which you can apply, but even in the processes where there is the vote, we have disproportionate vote out there, and we can outvote. Often, if we were smart, we can outvote bigs. So even if it was a Franco-German tandem, which would be pulling us there where we wouldn't want to be, we could always seek smart coalition and stop that. So it's hard to say, if I was German, if I was French, and somebody would come to me and start whining about the second class, I would just tell him, fuck off. You must be nuts. You just get money, you got votes, and what do you want on the earth? So we have to be very careful how we toy with this first class and second class thing. Here also we need to come with good candidates. I was often watching the processes where there was a selection of candidates, and we offered, you know, shitty candidates. Not always, but usually we do. And then we complain and that we do not get the position. Well, you know, what could have been done, of course, it's where precisely, Dr. Busek, you were aiming. And that was some of the recent debates on moving some of the EU institutions or organizations, and I'm not speaking of the parliament. That would be a great gesture to move the parliament to Krakow. Absolutely, I would immediately vote for that. But sometimes, you know, you could start with less ambitious things, like some of the European agencies. And there was a couple of agencies which were moving, and we failed, and it failed for very stupid artificial arguments, and they didn't end it in Central Europe. So, you know, sometimes we could do gestures which then would stop that mythology being abused, because you use a couple of things which are happening on the second class, and then populists get it at hand and they keep spinning it, and then it hurts, you know. So we have to be careful on the other side not to give populists the argument of the second class, but only on our side, we need to be careful about whining and bitching on that issue, because it's far from reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I remember there's a very famous poem about Hungary. I think it's closed with the sentence, Hungaria est in orbe ultima. I think, do you want to comment from your side, Mr. UGRÓSDY?
I think there's a great amount of regret in all of the Central European countries that those EU agencies, which were originally located in London, were not moved to Bratislava and Prague. Many of the V4 countries have been supporting that idea, and they should have gotten it. I very much agree with Ambassador KÁČER, surprising as it may be, that this is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy that we have first-class and second-class member states in the European Union. And I agree on the one hand that we should be a bit more smarter. We, as the Central and Eastern European countries, the post-2004 countries, if you wish, because the rules of the game have to be learned. And in that way, we're still in the learning process when it comes to making coalitions, when it comes to reaching out to strange bedfellows, if you wish. So cooperating with Portugal on fisheries, for instance, is not something that the Hungarian government might be used to, but on certain occasions, it might become necessary for trade-offs in other portfolios. So this kind of smart engagement with other member states, I think, should be very important. And as the QMVs will become more and more prevalent in different policy areas, we will have to resort to these kind of alliances more significantly in the future. On the other hand, I do think that, one second, apologies.
Obviously, somebody is building a new Europe.
Yeah, my kids are trying to break the door on me. So my apologies for that. So you can do that on your Zoom bingo that kids are done. So anyway, what I wanted to say is that Ambassador KÁČER is right that if we want to be taken seriously, we have to behave seriously. But that kind of second-class treatment when it comes to policy ideas, when it comes to candidates for different EU positions, when it comes to the European External Action Service, for example, and who's heading different delegations in different countries and from which country do they come from, are still telling signs that, if I may call that, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. So if we would be able to overcome this subjective impression, if we could do something about that, I think that would be also a very promising signal that solidarity is not a word that everybody is trying to use and abuse, but a rather greater concept which acknowledges that all the member states, from Malta to Germany, are treated as equals when it comes to common decision making.
Thank you very much. Sebastian wants to say something, please.
I'm following the discussion very closely, and it's very, very interesting. But I would like to bring another aspect into the discussion when it comes to solidarity, because the solidarity not only between the governments and the member states, but also within the societies. Because when we see, when we, I don't know if we can draw a direct line between having different concepts of democracy and then ending up at unsolidarity within societies. But we have arrived at a point where people are going on the streets and do not show the minimum amount of solidarity that is necessary at the moment by wearing, for instance, a mask. They're protesting that, they are experiencing it as something that violates their basic rights. So my question would be, and that's directed towards the whole panel, because I follow the discussion in Germany. I follow the quite absurd discussion that has happened over a protest over the weekend when demonstrators compare themselves to historical figures that are in no way comparable. I would also be interested in how this is observed in Hungary, how this is observed in Slovakia, or Mr. Ambassador, you're currently in Czechia, how the discussion is going on there, and what does the erosion of the solidarity within society mean for the development of the European idea?
Who wants to answer? I think it is a real right question for the future direction.
So, I mean, I cannot, oh, no, you go ahead, because.
Mr. KÁČER, please. Ambassador Rossi.
This is very, very complex question you put. It's almost for whole 1 hour more. First thing is that any measure taken by government needs to be, again, I come to this point, it's not only what you do, but how you do. It's extremely important. In here, the communication of what's done and keeping clear line of communication and some logic in what is done is extremely important. So first element of that internal society solidarity is that people need sense in the regulation, and it applies almost to every law or every regulation, that if you put 10 things in practice, out of which 2 might be a nonsense issue, then people tend to think that all other 8, which may be perfectly fine, are nonsense. So here I think some of the troubles, in particular with wearing the masks, or some of the measures taken, like why could you have 50 people for one event, regardless whether the event is a stadium, outdoor stadium, or a small room? Or why should you wear a mask walking in the park when nobody's around, etc. So there's a couple of things where people start to question sanity or basic functionality of the rules. Then over time, people start to think that other measures which make sense are all almost nonsensical. So the first part of the problem is often erratic communication by our leaders in Slovakia and then elsewhere as well. This is not a specific attributable thing to one country. You find it also in other countries, that communication, right communication, timely explanation of measures, and measures which make sense, and a good PR, a good selling point, that is extremely important. Second thing, and you may think that I'm paranoid. Probably I am paranoid by profession, but my paranoias are coming true, unfortunately. This is an issue, another issue, which it's perfectly matching with the playbook of propaganda war or info war, which is happening in Europe. If you would look into the websites which are feeding these things, anti-vaccination, COVID is a an invention. It's not a reality. Wearing the mask and kill you or almost all of that conspiracies, all of that idiocy which is coming around. That is, it's coincidentally spread by the same websites. It's been spreading the same shitstorm about the migration crisis, about whatever, which is putting the wedge into the glue of Europe. So that's perfectly matching agenda for Russian-driven propaganda, probably not Chinese. It's been an intelligence report, yearly intelligence report, both in Slovakia, both in Czech Republic. It's almost the same identical language used. It's been published quite recently, both of the report. Our head of intelligence giving a very blunt interview, too blunt, well, not too blunt, finally blunt interview, I'm praising it, last week, which was saying how this is playing into the Russian propaganda. And when you look at the squares, who people were coming in Slovakia on 17th of November, that symbolic Velvet Revolution anniversary, the most bizarre combination of people protesting against anti-COVID measures by the government, where you see these Nazis, the brown Nazis, and then you see next to them these Marxists with the Soviet Union flag, and then you see hooligans who just like to beat people on the street because they got nothing better to do in their life, just to feed the frustration into hitting somebody's face, etc., etc. The most bizarre combination, fueled by conspiracies. And on the top of that, those people who are unsatisfied because unclarity of communication, and then you got a snowball, which is not good one. And that is what we see. And we don't see it only in Central Europe. We see those seeds almost everywhere. And we saw those seeds in Brexit talk. It's here, it's present.
Thank you very much for your clear words. I think that's extremely important. I think these are the real political questions. May I say, looking to solidarity, what it means, sometimes I have the fear that we have not really learned to speak and to listen. I think it is a certain tendency that we don't want to understand ourselves one to each other. That's one of the big problems. And I think it's quite necessary that we are listening and that we are speaking clearly. I think there's too much noise. I think we are spilled down by words and so on and so on. And I think to distinct, I think is one of the necessities which human beings have to do. I'm looking to the watch, beg your pardon, and I'm asking you, last round, who wants to take the floor? Nobody?
I still would be interested in the question of solidarity in the society, also, of course, in Germany, which was happening. So
I guess that's me. So I will go first also for the final round. That's fine. I just didn't want to take the floor first again. I would like to say, well, I agree, first of all, that this would be a topic for another hour. I don't have an hour, so I will try to be brief. First of all, I think it's important to recognize that these protests that are taking place in Germany, for example, in Berlin or before in Leipzig, are a relatively small minority. They are loud and they are very active and they are very present in social media, but it's still a small group and a minority of the German position. The support overall in the public on the COVID measures is still large. It is declining somewhat, but if you look at research that asks why people are skeptical about the measures that are taking place in Germany right now, and these, for those who are maybe not that aware, include that most of the social life has been shut down, but schools and kindergartens have stayed open and work to a certain degree also, is that people are skeptical that we should not also close the schools. So some people also want more measures rather than less. I think that when you look at the groups that are protesting in Germany, it's a similar variety and mix of people that are taking to the streets, and I think that but if you look at the everyday life, if you go into the shops in Germany, if you go into public transport, the overwhelming majority is wearing masks and is adhering to the rules, and the children all know how to wash their hands for 20 seconds, even if some of them count them very, very slowly if they want to, like my daughter does. So I think that these protests that are very visible and also very unfortunate, especially in the case that they have now taken to our parliament twice, in the front of the parliament and last week also inside the parliament, which is something that shows a degree of disrespect for democracy, I think. That is worrisome, but overall I think that that it should not be used as an example for declining solidarity in the German society.
Thank you. Mr. UGRÓSDY?
Well, wearing a mask might infringe your right to kill yourself, but maybe the greater social good is to keep you alive, so it should be necessary. Coming back to discipline of society, of course, my experience is not representative because I live in a capital, but it seems like that people understand the risks and they follow the rules. And that way there's some kind of adherence to the regulations, even though they're becoming stricter every week. But if we can see the end of the pandemic, I think they will be accepted. We know for sure that the Hungarian government is very sensitive to opinion polling. So I guess that what is happening is in line with what the majority of the people would like to see. And this kind of COVID denying groups are present, especially in the social media. But as you may know, Hungarians have the tendency to be very upset on Facebook and do nothing in real life. So that way, we haven't seen violent protests like those that have been shaken in Berlin in the last couple of days. So people tend to be a bit grumpy about these issues. They tend to be a bit upset, but generally they follow rules because the numbers are not that encouraging at the moment, and as more and more people are being infected, and sooner or later all of the families will be impacted somehow, this will become a personal experience, and then the compliance with the rules will become higher as a result. But solidarity in society, that's a tricky question, and it takes more than an hour to find something meaningful on that.
Many thanks for your comment. I think sometimes there's a feeling there are too many reports and too much reported about the events of the criticism on COVID-19. I think if I'm looking to the number who are on the streets, also in Austria, I think it's not so much, but it is a huge, long report and so on, and how horrible. And so sometimes I think a lot of journalists are living out of explaining everything that it is horrible. I think sometimes journalists are horrible, but don't tell it to journalists, then I will get again bad comments. I think.
Good thing that nobody's watching this.
I'm KÁČER. A last word in your wise way.
This was an exciting debate. And for Slovaks, you know, we are very disciplined people. So wearing the mask since the beginning, even in the first wave, was something which was very much followed. And even what happened in Slovakia a few weeks ago was this testing, which happened throughout all the country. And you saw that people took it in a great discipline and were waiting for hours outside for that. I was myself surprised about my compatriots, how solidary and how